You're listening to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, Accelerated Edition number 16. Today I speak with artist, art teacher, and owner of Project Grieve, Danica Thurber, on grief, art, and healing. Welcome to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, Accelerated Edition, where we gain inspiration and motivation from others who share their stories of renewing hope and discovering purpose in any circumstance. I am Christina Reisinger, and today you will be encouraged by another tremendously inspirational topic that will embolden you to release your fear, begin taking small steps forward, and move into your God-given purpose to live and serve in this life. Join me for today's story. Hey, Danica, and welcome to Faith Breathed Hope. How are you today?
I'm really good. How are you?
I am good, and I'm so excited that you're here. So the first thing that I always do is I have the guests tell the audience who they are.
Awesome. So my name is Danica Thurber. I'm married to a wonderful man named Tony, and we live in Boise, Idaho. I work full-time from home, but in many part-time capacities. So I work as an artist. I work as an art teacher, an art minister, and then a very big part of my life is with our online school called projectgrief.org. And it's a school where I teach art as a tool for grief recovery. And that comes from a really deep place, from a personal place in my story. When I was 12, I lost my dad very suddenly to a heart attack. And that began a journey of several subsequent losses in a row, and really a whole struggle in terms of how to grieve. And I didn't really have permission back then, or the tools in order to grieve. And honestly, we were just on survival. My mom and I had two younger siblings, and we were just trying to get by. There really wasn't space to grieve. And so Project Grief is really my gift to the world. It's the thing that I wish I would have had back then. And as a result of creating it, I think I've also experienced like a subsequent healing on top of it, being able to use what I went through, the pain and all of that chaos, in order to help others create something beautiful out of it. So, yeah.
So I love that. And most people that I talk to who are in the grief space or in a place where they are working with healing have a story similar to that, not necessarily, a paternal loss, but somewhere they have lost somebody or something that has led them to want to be of service to other people. So Danica, you began using your own art to help you heal from this grief. So can you talk a little bit about that? And then, today's topic is around using art to heal grief. So we want to just know what that looks like. Go ahead and tell us your story around that.
Sounds good. Yeah. So I grew up in a very creative household. I was really lucky in that sense. My dad was a draftsman, so he did all the technical drawings and stuff. And my mom, she used to paint in college, but then since having us kids, she did like interior decorating and her food, like culinary arts to the max. And so she always did like crafts with us. That was just the environment that I grew up in. And so I was already showing signs of being artistic and artsy. And so I drew a lot as a kid. Lots of pencil drawings, lots of just trying to copy photos and things like that and kind of teach myself. And so when my dad passed, one of my like driving fears back then was that I would forget my dad. And so I kind of took it upon myself to be like the family historian, because I was like, my little brother and sister aren't going to remember much about him. And so it's my job as the oldest to remind them. And so I took, I was doing the pencil drawings already, trying to copy photos and learn that way. And so what I ended up doing is just going through all of our family photo albums. My mom said I like ruined all of them by tearing through. But I was looking for pictures, of my dad and memories and moments that I wanted to solidify. And so I started drawing all of those things. And sometimes I do some painting of like camping trips we went on, things that were important to me that I wanted to remember. And so my art back then was really focused on memory keeping. And so that was my drive. And then as time went on, really shortly after we lost my dad, my grandma was diagnosed with a rare lymphoma. And losing her was very different than losing my dad, because we were grieving her while she was still with us. It was a very slow kind of death. And my mom was caretaker part-time with her, and so I became part-time caregiver for my siblings. It was just a really hard time. And so I don't know that we ever got, time to grieve through all of it. And so I remember kind of getting a more interpretive, expressive kind of painting out. When I was at school, actually, I was painting out, this person lying on a hospital bed and their hands reached out, and then a hand coming down from heaven, taking them up. And I just I was at school, I was crying. It was so embarrassing. And I just went in the bathroom, just hid myself. It was really hard, but I needed that. I needed that expression. And so moving from there, I was tackling some deep, dark themes as now, mid-teen. But I was always very, very careful to put an element of light or hope in my paintings. And that served to kind of distance people from me. I wanted to show the darkness that I was going through, but I wanted to put some hope so that people would stay this far. They wouldn't know the depth of the stuff that was going on in me. So I wanted to be a good Christian girl. I wanted to, have it all together for mom and, make dad proud, And to me, that meant knitting myself together, and that became a wall that really took me apart from myself, apart from many others. And that did evolve into depression and some really deep, dark things. And so that led me as a college student then to a point of emotional breakdown. And during that time, it was a summer of intense counseling, and I would go to 2 sessions a week. And after those sessions, all I could do was stare at a wall and just sit. There was no thoughts, there was no emotions going on in my mind. It was like my dad had died the day before, but because I didn't grieve, it happened 8 years later. And so during that time, I would cry in my art studio, which back then was a little corner of my garage back then. And I would paint, and then I'd kneel down and cry, and I'd paint and cry and paint and cry. And it was just a crazy moment where I was painting my tears. I was painting my emotions. My paintings finally became real. They didn't need that element of hope and light, because I was desperate to become real in myself.
Wow, that's
so,
just a beautiful,
yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you. I just
Oh,
want to
no
jump in.
worries.
That's just a beautiful image of being able to release that pain. I know it was not beautiful while you were going through it. I mean, but just knowing that you could use that to express whatever was deep inside is amazing. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you pointed that out, because that's really, from that summer of brokenness, which I did survive. I thought those tears would be endless, that the darkness would swallow me up. It wasn't. But on the other side of that healing, much counseling, much ministry, I began to be a mentor to others. And it started very innocently enough. I was a student leader in my church group, and there was not that many people. There's maybe 30 of us in this small church group, and maybe a third of them had lost one or both parents. It was so bizarre that, us in our late teens, early 20s, that group would have such a concentration of people who had lost parents. And I guess my pastors realized this was no mistake, so one of my mentors took me, and we did a night, it was called Night of Remembrance. And so we formed this kind of stations all around a room where we could do elements of our grief. There's a childhood station where we could just sit and hug a teddy bear. There's even a dad hug station where our pastor was giving out dad hugs. And there was piece of paper that had, I guess, just blank spaces for us to put actual Band-Aids onto the paper. And on the Band-Aids, we wrote words that somebody had said to us that were helpful or intended to be helpful, but not actually helpful. Things like time will heal, God needed another angel, God has a plan, we shouldn't mourn, all of those things that people say, those are Band-Aids. They just cover up the wound, they don't actually heal. And so I came up with all of these little stations to help my peers, and I would continue the work in one-on-one meetings with some younger students. And when she would become just overwhelmed or she just shut down, not knowing how to express what she was struggling with, I'd take out some crayons and like a stray napkin and just say, okay, can you draw for me how you feel right now? And give her some time, and then I'd ask questions. So why did you use that color? Like, why are you that size? What's around you? Why did you draw yourself like that? And then I'd be like, okay, so can you draw God or your grief or, your mom you lost, whatever it was? And then we'd ask, okay, so what's the relationship between those two? Is she turned away? Is she moving towards you? What can we change about this drawing? Maybe she's reaching out, or maybe she's saying something to you. So we would talk through the issue by looking down at the napkin. And it was so much easier for whoever it was to talk about their emotions, those deep stuff that they're really struggling with, by using that piece of paper that externalized all of that pain and chaos.
Yeah, that is really interesting that, you can use a visual representation to kind of trigger your mind, because there's so many people that are going through grief. They don't have any understanding of their feelings, their thoughts. They don't have the words to put to what's going on inside of them. It's very traumatic. A lot of times people don't, anticipate, there may be a surprise loss. Like you said with your grandmother, it was an illness. And so there was a lot of anticipatory grief there. With my daughter, it was the same way. I mean, we had anticipatory grief throughout the pregnancy, and then again for 10 and a half months during her life. So it's no better, no worse, but it is different. It is different with every person. It is different with every person that you lose, every relationship. You're at different rites of passage in your life. You have different experiences, and people change throughout their lives too. So they have different perspectives of what's going on in the world. And knowing that art is such a powerful tool to bring out that emotion and help there be a better understanding around that emotion, I think is just amazing. I am a huge art fan, huge art lover. And so can you talk about a little bit about, so you said that they're drawing and you say, if this is you, why are you this size? So you're asking these questions. Is there any more to it? I mean, as far as like the medium of art, I mean, do you draw art yourself for other people? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah. So Project Grief is, we experiment with a lot of different mediums and topics and things. So that was the example that I shared, was before Project Grief was created. It was just kind of the beginnings of like, oh, I have something to offer, people through what I've been through. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to note as well that those students that I was working with were not artists. None of them were artistically inclined, and so that kind of began the idea that like you don't have to be an artist in order to use art therapeutically. Mm-hmm. So there's fine art, which is about the product, the final product, the value we assign to it as a society, and I do fine art. But I also do grief art, and grief art is totally different. It's about the process that you go through in order to reach the final product. And that's where the value is in that process that you've gone through. Mm-hmm. And so if the final product ends up ugly or messy, good job. You've just expressed grief. It's ugly and messy, right? So that's a big, big thing to think about, as we talk about the power of art, that it's available to anyone. And I like to say it's because grief and loss take us beyond words.
Yes.
And so we need to go beyond words in order to heal. It just makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, grief is very hard to define, and it's very awkward. And
It is hard. It's hard to express. So a lot of times I'll work with people, and I love the fact that you said you don't have to be an artist, because a lot of times I'll work with people on journaling. And I have somebody say, well, I'm not a writer. I don't know how to journal, and just like you said, it's not about that final product. It's not about having a perfect masterpiece. It's about being able to get out those emotions and follow that thought process and those feelings, um, until you can come to a space where you can see hope. At least for me, I think that's the key point, is to being able to find the space where um, you're no longer angry at the well-meaning people who said, God needed another angel, or time will heal our wounds, or those kind of things. You realize that it's just what it is, that they're trying to help you and that they care about you, and they don't really know
what to say.
Yeah. But you can carry that and move forward and find good ways to honor that grief, such as you're doing with your art. You use your art to help other people with their grief, which I think is fantastic. That being of service really does continue to heal us, and it helps heal other people as well, and gives them the motivation to reach out and help someone else. It can be very cyclical. So, what else do you work with? Just children, or do you work with certain age ranges?
So I mostly work with adults actually right now.
Adults. Oh, I thought you said you were working with kids. I apologize.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. No worries. No, my future hope actually is to work with kids, because that was where my loss started.
Okay.
So I'm currently writing a children's book to deal with the loss of a grandma to cancer. So very much inspired by my story. But for now, Project Grief is all art courses to help adults work through their grief. And I think that comes from my story too, because, my loss happened when I was a kid. But my actual grief journey was as an adult, because that's when I was able to process. And so working with adults, I think a lot of us, we're so, especially women, I think we're focused on caring for others. I felt that as a little 12-year-old taking care of my siblings.
Yeah.
We have to make sure everyone else is okay, and then inside we're slowly dying. And I'm just so passionate about helping other women understand that their healing is a priority, and their healing is a blessing to everyone around them. So one of the transformations actually that I'm really proud of, and that I long to see in Project Grief and in every student that I work with, is a transformation I call from grief victim to grief artist. So a grief victim is where we're all at when we lose somebody. We would never choose to experience a loss. We would never choose to go through that kind of a pain. And so grief is something that happens to us. Thus we're a victim. But when we don't process our grief, when we don't really deal with what's going on inside of us, I think we have a tendency, and I speak as one who knows, to develop a grief victim mentality. And so that's the I can't do that. I can't clean out the room because I'm going to melt down. I can't go to that place because I'm afraid of what I'll feel. I can't, I can't respond truthfully to this person who's asking me how I feel, because I'll bring them down. There's so many things that I can't because grief has happened to me. And while I think that those things are very valid, those feelings and thoughts, and I never ever want to judge somebody, understanding first that you're acting out of a grief victim mentality means that you're seeing that you're painting your world in terms of grays and blacks and whites. It's a very half-life kind of way to live. And I think we all have to take some time there in the grief victim stage to allow ourselves to be cared for, to just let the feelings come. But at some point, we're going to have to journey out. And so that place of healing, I call, is a grief artist. And so a grief artist is somebody who is not immune to pain, who is not, isolated from loss or any kind of struggle. But they're people who actually take that raw pain and chaos and loss and use it as their palette to paint their life in full color.
Mm-hmm.
And so they literally bring the beauty out of the ashes. And it's not in a trite way, like, oh, just paint a flower over it, you know. It's that beauty that you saw, you know, when I talked about the painting and crying and painting and crying,
Mm-hmm.
you saw, you know, just in my story that there was so much beauty out of that chaos and pain that I went through. And look at the beauty, you know, that's coming out of it now, that God is working out of it. But that's what a grief artist can do. I think I myself have become one, and I love to raise up other women to understand that the deep parts, the ugly parts, the painful parts are part of that full color palette that we use to paint our life. But they're not the only color that we use to paint. You know, we can add in some yellows and some splash of green and orange and red, and that's a full life, you know, when we're using our full color palette. And that's when healing comes, is when we open ourselves up to all the colors, all the emotions that are available to us. That's a full life.
I just imagine, like if you're looking at a piece of artwork, and then when you experience the loss, the color just fading out until, like you said, you get into the space of just black and white and grays. And, you know, as you go on your grief journey and as you move forward on your grief journey, you're slowly adding in color. It's not a facade, it's actually interwoven, and it helps bind together so that you can become whole again. And I love that imagery. That's just beautiful. So, you know, I remember when, you know, Isabella passed away, you know, we had a lot of that. We had a lot of people would say things that they thought would help, and it didn't. And I first started talking about being a grief coach, and I was in the middle of my certification, and I had to tell my story. And my coach asked me to tell my story about losing her, and I was a hot mess. I just cried. And after telling that story, I thought to myself, you know what? How can I help other people? Because I am still crying myself. Like, 'cause growing up, I thought that in order for me to help others, do what?
Who am I to help?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, because I felt like I was groomed to present myself in a certain way. So if I had it all together, then everybody, you know, could look up to me in a certain way. And I said, well, I don't have everything together. And, you know, what I realized is that by me being authentic and me allowing myself to still feel that pain and saying, you know what, it's okay. It's okay that I'm not perfect and I'm not going to be perfect. People are able to relate to that. And so I think that's part of that transformation you're talking about into being that grief artist. So and so I'm really encouraged that you shared that you're not perfect. It's not that you don't feel that pain. You still feel that pain, but you're able to kind of walk past it and share with other people to help draw theirs out.
Yeah. So, exactly. Yeah.
That is really.
No, I don't know if I should share the why art works part of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know how much time we have, but
no, we have time. Go ahead. I want to know why it works, the science, whatever you want to say, because I know everybody thinks differently.
Yeah, definitely. And this isn't sciencey. I like to say that it's common sense, logical, I guess, as logical as an artist can communicate. But it comes from my experience and really deep thinking about why is it that art helps, and my experience with others. And so there's 4 ideas. And so the first idea is that grief and art are both abstract. So that's why it works. So if you think about grief, you had mentioned this actually, is that grief is just a congealed blob of bleh, you know, like it's hard to describe. That's why words just fail us, you know. I'm like, I'm feeling down just doesn't cut it, you know. But I can scribble out a black ball of yuck, and suddenly that makes sense. That's what grief looks like. It's that scribbled black ball of yuck. It's abstract, and that's a component that both grief and art can share. And so I can symbolize hope with a star or the color yellow. There's so many things that you can encapsulate in color and shape and design. That's the abstract quality of art. And I think grief lends itself to that, because we can talk about, so where is that ball of yuck right now? Where do you feel it physically? Or, where do you feel it in your drawing? Where is that? We can talk in abstract terms, and you can get so much more farther when you remove it from yourself and talk like that. So I think I don't know, it's just so cool that both of them are abstract. But that might be the artist nerdy part of myself talking.
I'm very much, I think that way as well. So I like the idea of making it abstract, because then you can say, well, you know what, I'm not so weird. Because with grief comes a lot of really weird thoughts, a lot of strange feelings. And, we tend to want to, make it structured, like, because it hurts so bad, you want to get through it. You want to get through it and you want it to be done.
Step 1, 2, 3.
Mm-hmm. So, you look up the stages of grief and you say, okay, well, I've been through this and this. And, we don't all go through the stages at the same time. And then also the stages, it's not like you go through one thing and then you're done with it. You're like, oh gosh, I got through the depression. I got through the anger. I'm done. I can go away. I can move on. Once I get this acceptance thing, I'm going to be great, And I don't know about everybody else, but I probably thought that way in the very beginning. And I don't remember. My short-term memory has kind of gotten kaput since my daughter passed away, but that I'm assuming is for protection. But I do remember researching the stages of grief and even writing about the different stages of grief. I even write about them in my book. So it was very important to me to try to put some structure around what was going on, to try to make sense of the whole thing, and know that is not uncommon for people to do. But the problem is that when I said, okay, well, I've gone through anger, and I said, okay, good, I'm done. I've worked that out. And then 5 months later, I'm angry again, and I'm barking at my family, and I don't know what's going on. Then it puts in that complication of, hey, you know what? I thought I went through this. I thought we, like you said, we checked that box. I didn't check that box because it's not the same, and it continues to come up here and there, and it just jumps around. So it's that abstract thing, but it doesn't have to be that abstract thing devoid of joy, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And
It can be a ball of string, like multicolored string is your grief. It's all those emotions,
I kind of visualized, like, you said this abstract blob, and you were talking about before this black and white and gray. So I'm thinking of this like liquidy mess, kind of like, when you pour a bunch of paint all in one pile, and like you have black and then you add white to it and you swirl it around, that kind of thing. And it's moving and it's changing. But then, you get it to this place where you can start adding color, and you're swirling it around, and it becomes very beautiful. So
totally. I love that. That's such a good illustration. Yeah, because the raw material was the black and white, the kind of part. Yeah. And that enables
you make great things out of it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So another, like, I guess a bonus thing. So I said there's 4 ideas of why to use art. You were talking about the need for structure. What I like to say, I guess, is that you feel a need for containment, I think is a word that could suggest that, the structure, because grief feels so big, so amorphous. You want to contain it and understand it a little more. And so if you think of the 4 corners of a piece of paper or the 4 corners of a canvas, you can put your grief onto that. Like, you can do the amorphous blob, the color thing, the black swirls and all that stuff, but it's contained within those little 4 corners. And so suddenly it's not as scary anymore when it can fit on an 8x10, like there's a containment to it that's so much more understandable. And like, oh, grief feels that big, but I can look at it from this far, and it's okay. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So, Danica, what do you, a couple more questions. What do you plan on doing moving forward? So you said that you work with adults currently, and, you work with mostly women. Is that what you said? Yes.
Yeah.
So I love that, because a lot of women, like you even stated before, they tend not to take care of themselves first. And when you're going through grief and you constantly push it aside, it doesn't go away. It's just stuffed, and you do have to deal with it later because it will resurface. So, any mom or other woman knows that in order to take care of their family or the people that they care about, they have to first take care of themselves. And I think so often we don't do that. But you did say that you want to work with children, right?
Eventually adding children to the mix, but I'm not giving up on my women and the team that I'm currently doing. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think what I'm working towards now is getting the message out. I have tons and tons of materials. I love creating things to help people, but I'm not a business person. And so I've learned all of this kind of stuff on the side. I like to say I went to the University of YouTube and got my unofficial business degree into like
I get it.
yeah. But so what I'm doing is connecting with people like you and so many people in this grief space, and just saying, hey, I'm so glad that you're seeking healing right now. Please consider using art in your toolbox. And so what I have is a 10 lesson master course that builds on the mindset between grief victim and grief artist. So it identifies the key characteristics of what does it look like to be a grief victim. Can you identify with any of these? I'm sure you do, at least to a little extent, to all of them. And so we work step by step and like, okay, here's grief victims feel intimidated by the long-term process of grief, and they like to use an easy button or just run away. That's a grief victim mindset. But grief artists embrace the fact that it's a long-term process. And that's one of my other points, is that grief and art are processes. They go up and down and down and down. And so grief artists embrace that fact and even begin to enjoy the fact that it's a process, and they get involved in it, and they aren't intimidated by how far they go or they have to go. They're excited about how far they've come. And so that's a grief victim, grief artist mindset. And so each little lesson and step is 10 mindsets tackling, like, let's transform this grief victim mindset and turn it on its head and see if we can find the beauty and the hope in this. And so that's my master course that I bring people through, is let's take steps together towards becoming a grief artist. And I really do believe that grief artists can change their little corner of the world. So that's the thing that I'm most passionate about, and just so excited to be able to share in every space. So there's that. And then a lot of these women are moms or, grandmas or aunts and all these things. And they've got a kid who's experienced the same loss they have. But exactly like you've been saying, is that the kid is going through something totally different. It's the same loss, but their grief looks completely different, and according to age and developmental level and the relationship to the person. And so I want to be able to provide something for those kids, but also something for those parents. There's discussion questions for talking about maybe an impending loss, and then also a post-loss kind of follow-up. So depending on where the child is at, or, throughout the journey of dying and then death. And then it comes with an art project, of course. So the little girl in the children's book makes a project that she essentially calls a gift of encouragement for her dying grandma. Then she realizes that she also needs the gift of encouragement for herself, that her mom, who's grieving the loss, and her grandpa, they need gifts of encouragement as well. So it becomes a more metaphorical way of dealing with the loss as encouragement altogether. And so this project that the girl makes in the book, there's instructions to make it at the end. And so I imagine it as something that, mom and child, or caregiver and child, guardian and child can do together to encourage one another. So,
love it.
Yeah, so that's really exciting. I'm excited for that. It'll come out in the fall. So stay tuned. Yeah.
Awesome. How exciting. I think I shared with you that I was thinking about writing a children's book as well about grief.
Do it.
Yeah, because I've noticed that my own daughter, who is now 5, my youngest now, has experienced grief differently. Like she was 2 when her sister passed away, and I guess I just assumed that she wouldn't remember, and now it comes out that she misses her. So,
So crazy.
yeah. So I would, we're gonna try to see if we can't help little girls and other kids. Yeah, work with I guess the loss of a sibling. I haven't really I haven't really gotten into that project yet, but we're gonna plan on it.
So cool though. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
yeah. Something about the sibling that I never met.
Yeah.
Grieving. Yeah.
And I work in the space with so many. You had mentioned earlier, I work in the space with so many of us who have gotten into the grief space because of our own loss. And I will say that everybody that I work with, they really, really want to help people. It's there. Everybody is so good about collaborating. Everybody is so good about working together and helping one another, because the whole point of being in this space is not just about business. It's first and foremost about helping other people, because we've been there. And we've been there, and we just want to comfort other people and let them know that there is hope. So I love that. Do you have any words for other people, for the people that are grieving? Do you have any words of encouragement? I don't want to say advice, but maybe there's some tools if they don't have somebody like you to coach them through it. Is there something that they could do at home? Other than just get out a piece of paper and a pencil. I mean, can you talk about that?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, well, I would encourage them to contact me because I do have a whole bunch of courses at different price points, because I want to make it accessible to the people who need it. And so I would be honored to walk with someone through this. That's exactly why I'm here, and why I'm so passionate about it. But on your own, there's so many different ways you can work through your loss creatively. I would say if you already have a journal practice, and that's not everybody, but some people, try writing out your feelings and then draw a little doodle of the same thing that you just drew. Because you can use stick figures, you can use scribbles, just like we were talking about. And so I think you'll be amazed at how much more you can draw out from the words, starting with the words, because that's where you're familiar with if you have a journal practice, doing it into a doodle, what other things you might comprehend. I think even if you don't have a journal practice, just doing a YouTube video and just doing art, I mean, that's therapeutic in itself.
Yeah.
But I think the difference between, just doing art, to distract yourself from all those feelings, and doing art to engage your feelings, I think there is a vital difference. And I think it really begins with giving yourself permission to grieve. And so I think that's my encouragement to others, is that permission can come from, voices like you and I that are influencers in this space, that say, hey, you are important. You deserve the time and energy and resources to get better, to heal. And crying is okay, and it's okay not to be okay. All of these messages that we can say, but we can say that all day and not make any difference if that person who's listening is not willing to go there. And so I have an exercise that I have for free. I can give you the link, and it's also included in your symposium as a bonus. That it's about working through giving yourself permission to grieve. So, if you're on limited time or energy, I have a template one where you fill in, this is my name, dear self, dear Christina, dear Danica, and then fill in the emotions, and it works through. And then on the next page, there's literally questions and statements that you can do to form your own permission statement. And I think that is really the tool. that will make, or the step you can take that will make all the difference, is that permission to grieve is what's in between you and your healing. And honestly, it's in between you and your art too. If you're interested in grief art, that thing, giving permission, is like opening a door to that creative expression. It will just flow from there, and it won't change overnight. It really won't. It's hard to open the door. Sometimes you open the door and you close it again because you get scared. But giving that permission over and over again, once you've written a statement or prepared it for yourself, you can keep on going back to it until you believe it for yourself, that that this is something important and worthwhile. So yeah, permission to grieve. I encourage you to do it for yourself.
Definitely. You don't have to stop it. You don't have to be strong. You don't have to hide it from the world because you feel like you're a burden. All of the above. I agree. So Danica, can you tell everyone who is listening where they can find you, please?
Yes. Yeah. So online, I'm at projectgrief.org. And that's where all of those free resources, blog, video, articles, and my courses are all available. So that's projectgrief.org. You can follow me on Instagram at Project Grief Art, or on Facebook at, you have to search at projectgrief.org. I know it's weird to search that in a Facebook space bar, but that's the one that pulls up my page. So yeah, I'd be happy to connect. And I love seeing others' grief art too. You know, maybe you're painting out a picture of your grandma or whatever it is. Send me a picture. I love to see it. And sometimes I feature that on my social media just to encourage people, like, hey, look what you can do. So I think it's important to honor other people's grief stories, and I love to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Danica, I'm so excited that you're here on Faith Breathes Hope.
Thanks for having me.
We hope that you continue to be blessed and bless others, and we'll talk to you next time.
And I want to thank you for joining us on Faith Breathed Hope, where you gain inspiration and motivation to renew hope and discover purpose in any circumstance. Please like and share this podcast and give us a review on iTunes. Be blessed.